The Knight with One Arm. It began in a tavern, like any other, on a night that had been wholly unremarkable. The stranger's entrance was devoid of note. He simply walked in and took a seat near the hearth. A popular spot, as there was a minstrel performing by the fire's light. The minstrel was a small, skinny man with fingers as gnarled as they were deft. He plucked away at his lute and sang a humorous song about a king being outsmarted by his own jester. The stranger laughed, sang along with the song, ate a meat pie, and drank some mead. But as the night drew on, the minstrel grew tired. Eventually, he bid his audience farewell before retiring to his room. It was then that the stranger got up and walked over to the table where the merchant Noel and two of his associates, Han and Harry, were dicing with Pate the farmer, as the group had done so for the past 2 nights. "Would you gentlemen mind terribly if I joined your game?"
"Not at all. Just don't cry when I take your crowns, eh?"
Noel laughed. "I'll try not to," the stranger replied with a slight smile. He was a man of average build and perhaps only slightly above average height. No beard, but a respectable amount of stubble wreathing his chin. His age seemed to be nearing the end of his 20s. He had a light-colored hair that looked almost silver when caught in the right light. His eyes were a slate gray, and he wore dark, thick clothes appropriate for a traveler. His cloak, draped over one arm, concealed his left arm. Noel, by comparison, was a stocky, well-muscled man with a thick black beard. His clothes were ornate, not quite the stuff of nobles, but only a short step below. Han and Harry were a bit taller and more muscular, if with less impressive beards. And finally, Farmer Pate was a solid but average man, with just a bit of gray sprinkled in his dark hair.
"The game is passage, and since you just joined, I think you ought to be the banker,"
Noel said. "I suppose that's only fair," the stranger said, sitting down across from the merchant. "What's the stake?"
2 crowns. We'd have set it higher, but Farmer Pate here is worried he'll end up gambling away his old farm."
Pate shrugged in reply. "My wife would never let me hear the end of it." The stranger nodded. "I respect a man who knows his limits." He pulled out a pouch and dumped out a pile of crowns, 16 in total, 4 for each of the other players. The others each put down 2 of their own. Noel picked up a trio of dice off the table, shook them a few times before tossing them. A 5, a 4, and a 3. 12. Seeing as the object of the game was to get above 10, Noel, the roller, had won, as had the other men at the table. The stranger, who'd been the banker, had lost, and would have to pay out twice the stake to each man. Being the banker in passage came with the greatest reward for victory, but an even greater risk for failure. That's what made the game, and gambling in general, interesting. The stranger slid 4 crowns over to each man, nodding to Noel for his win. "I certainly hope that's not a measure of how my luck is going to be this evening. So I've gathered that Pate over here is a farmer, but the rest of you gentlemen, I'm going to guess merchants."
"Are we that obvious?"
Noel smiled. "Your clothes were a giveaway, but in honesty, I've known enough merchants that I'd been able to peg you even without those." Noel rolled again. He came up with a 13, winning the round. He collected 4 crowns from Han, as did the stranger, Harry, and Pate.
"Seeing as how you sized me up, I think it's only fair I do you in turn."
"By all means," the stranger gestured for him to continue.
"Let's see. You said you've known plenty of merchants, but I doubt you're one yourself. You don't dress the part."
"You'd be right on that one."
"You seem like you're a man who works with his hands."
The banker position skipped over Noel, as he was still dealing, and went to Harry. Noel rolled again.
"A tradesman. Perhaps a leather worker? often sell your goods to merchants.
Afraid not.
Noel frowned. The dice had come up a 1, a 2, and a 5, the man's first loss. On his third, a new player would take over the rolling. They all handed over a pair of crowns to carry. Noel massaged his chin thoughtfully. He appeared more concerned at his guess being off than the loss of the round.
Well, based on your clothes, you seem to be a traveler. Perhaps a minstrel. No, I don't see an instrument. A bard, then. You saw someone had beaten you to the hearth, so you took the night off.
Noel rolled again, coming up short once more. Pate collected this time around.
Well, I have crafted my fair share of songs and poems. No one's ever seen fit to toss me a single coin for the effort.
The stranger, once again, was the banker. Noel rolled 2 5s and a 3, a winning roll. The stranger shelled out the crowns.
With your luck, I'm sure you aren't a professional gambler.
Correct. Much as I enjoy a game of chance, I'd never stake my living on the hobby. Noel nodded.
Shall I just tell you? No, don't do that. I'm certain I can guess if given the time.
At least let me give you a hint. The stranger then reached over and pushed his cloak back from his shoulder. The action revealed 2 things. The first was that there was no arm hiding behind the cloak, just a stump where one had once been. The other reveal was the sword at his belt. The stranger slid 4 crowns over to each man, using only his right hand.
A soldier? No, a sellsword. That is why you know merchants. You've been hired by many before, I'm sure.
The stranger dipped his head in what seemed like confirmation.
It may be rude to say, but I think with a wound like that, you may not be so good at your job.
You should see the other fellow. Noel barked a laugh at that. He tossed the dice, winning the next roll.
You know, my friend, if you enjoy gambling, there are much higher stake games if you've got the crowns for it.
Really? Where would one find such a game?
Not here, of course. But my associates and I will be moving on from this town tomorrow. We are headed to Soldam, and there are some very interesting games to be found there.
Noel won yet another round.
What kind of games?
Noel chuckled.
Further east, there is a game where they stick 2 snakes in a hole and bet on which one will slither out alive. Have you heard of such an event?
I have.
Picture that, but much bigger.
Noel tossed the dice again. 3 6s, a total of 18. He smiled at the win. That does sound intriguing. Pate furrowed his brow in confusion.
What you mean, bigger? You talking about dogs? Wolves? Bigger than that, my friend,
Noel chuckled. He rolled 1 more round. Victory again. The stranger was the dealer once more. He's talking about dragon spawn. The table went dead quiet. Noel stared at the stranger as if he didn't believe the words the man had just spoken. Han and Harry both stiffened and were eyeing their boss. Pate, for his part, started laughing.
Dragon spawn? This far west? You've been listening to too many bards' tales.
They caught the attention of the rest of the tavern at the word dragon spawn. Some had humorous expressions like Pate, but many others were uneasy, even nervous at mention of the word. Dragon spawn were the sort of creatures that mothers used to scare their children into behaving. They rarely came up in casual conversation. After staring for far too long, Noel sat back and forced a smile.
It is like the man here says. You seem to have concocted a tale for yourself. Dragon spawn. As if. I was only speaking of bears.
Bears, the stranger repeated.
Yes, bears.
Ah. The stranger nodded.
Seems I've listened to too many campfire stories.
I should say, Noel laughed, just a little too hard.
And the stranger laughed too, and soon all the men at the table were laughing. The other onlookers, seeing that it was some sort of misunderstanding, lost interest.
Well then, the stranger said, his chuckles fading. With that mistake out of the way, what do you say we get back to dicing?
Agreed.
Noel picked up the dice and shook them.
Oh, there's just one more thing.
What's that?
What do you have in that big crate on the back of your wagon?
Noel dropped the dice.
3 ones. Look at that. Your luck finally ran out, friend. The stranger smiled. What are you doing, spying on other men's wagons? Noel asked coldly. Me? Oh, I suppose I'm just a nosy person. Strange, I thought, that even at this late hour you still got 2 armed men guarding it. Must be something valuable. Or dangerous. It's silk, Noel replied in a tone that implied it would be in the stranger's best interest if he dropped the subject. It was then that a newcomer stumbled into the tavern, a boy, early in his teens if his face was anything to go by. Under that assumption, he was actually fairly tall for his age. He had a head of dark, finely combed hair. He held a spear gripped so tightly that it shook. His eyes were green and darted around the tavern nervously until they found the stranger. Sir! Yes? That thing in their wagon! It started moving! The stranger smiled and then turned back to Noel. Silk, you say? That is not your business, sellsword, Noel replied. Han and Harry reached underneath the table. You may want to step away, Pate, the stranger advised. Pate did not need to be told twice. He stumbled halfway across the tavern, but never quite looked away. Everyone's eyes were once again on the table. Sir, should I? Go keep an eye on that wagon, Casper. I'll be out shortly. The boy hesitated before reluctantly stepping back out into the night. Noel and the stranger stared at each other. Do you think you scare us, sellsword? We are 3, and you're missing an arm. Do you really think you can get the best of the 3 of us? And then what? Defeat my 2 guards outside and steal the prize for yourself? I'd like to correct you on one thing. And that is? I'm not a sellsword. My name is Alphonse. I'm a sworn knight of the Errant order, and this is my business. With that, he kicked over the table, sending dice and crowns flying. He tore his sword free and brought the pommel down on Han's head before the man could even raise the club he'd been reaching for. The large man dropped like a stone. Too slow, my friend, the stranger, or rather, the knight, said. He launched himself at Harry next, faster than a loosed arrow. The larger man managed to bring up his club, but the knight didn't give him a chance to make use of it. He moved like a charging boar, unleashing a series of blows against the other man. Harry stumbled back, struggling to block the onslaught. The knight carved scars in the club's wood, knocking it back and forth with every swing. The knight pulled his blade back, ready for a powerful overhead strike. Harry pounced on the opening, as any man would have. He earned himself a swift kick to the groin and a pommel to the chin. While Harry crumpled to the floor, the knight turned on his final opponent, Noel. The merchant had drawn a sword of his own. The knight gave his blade a dramatic twirl, causing it to shine in the hearth's light. I believe you were saying something about it being 3 against 1, and I'm missing an arm. Well, I'm still missing the arm. Noel growled, dragging the table out of the way to launch himself at the knight. Their swords clashed, steel ringing out. Noel pressed the offense, wailing on his opponent like a blacksmith hammering on a disobedient piece of steel. But the knight was unfazed by the assault. If anything, there was mirth in his expression. He turned away each of Noel's strikes almost casually, Noel grew more and more frantic in his swings. He buried his blade into a tabletop after the knight dodged an overhead swing. The patrons sitting at the table scattered, spilling drinks. Noel ripped his blade free, spraying splinters. Well, if your aim was to kill the table, you're on to a good start. Noel gritted his teeth and swung wildly, but the knight easily deflected the sloppy attack and scored a cut on the man's shoulder. Noel winced, but attacked again, thrusting for the knight's throat. The knight countered the move, giving Noel a strike on the chin. Panicked, Noel made one final swing for the knight's gut. The knight stepped into the attack, blocked it with his blade, then drove a shoulder into Noel's chest. The big man stumbled back. The knight swung once more, swift and true. He struck the merchant on the top of the head with the flat of his blade. Noel fell back, stumbling over another table, spilling cheap ale all over himself. The knight leveled the blade at his throat. Would you accept a bribe? The merchant asked, releasing his own blade. Money isn't a particular concern of mine, so I'm afraid not. Are you going to kill me? Noel swallowed hard. The knight rolled his eyes. I am if you keep lying there like an upturned turtle. On your feet, man. Noel scrambled back up, keeping both hands raised in surrender. The knight motioned for him to walk towards the door. Now we're going to see those abominations you brought into this fine town. They walked outside the tavern, and several of the patrons followed. It wasn't every day a town like this got so much excitement. It was a full moon out, so there was enough light to see by. The boy, Casper, was waiting. If possible, he looked even more unnerved than before. He passed the spear from one hand to the other, a nervous gesture that seemed to do nothing to calm him. Talk to me, kid, the knight said, moving to the side of the building, just next to the stables, where there was a large wagon. Two men stood by the wagon, pointing their own spears at whatever laid inside. They looked almost as nervous as Casper. The shaking's only gotten worse, Sir Alphonse. Whatever's inside, it sounds ready to come out. What have you got in there? The knight asked, this time directed at Noel. It was just 2 eggs. They weren't supposed to hatch for days. Perhaps no one has told you this before, but dragon spawn aren't known for running by human schedules. They do and eat whatever they want, whenever they want. The wagon had a crate taking up its entire bed. The crate was about the height of a man and twice as long. The 2 guards very nearly jumped out of their skin as the group approached. Boss, one of them explained, something's happening with the cargo. Yes, the dragon spawn. Open it. What? They said in unison. You can't open that thing here, Noel protested. I think I'm going to have to agree with them, Casper admitted. And wait for them to inevitably break out? No. We're going to slay them right here, right now, while we can still do it on our own terms. We? Casper managed to stammer out. Yes, Casper, we. This is what you signed up for. The boy swallowed. Right. Open it, the knight repeated. The guards, confused, looked back and forth between Noel and the knight. Boss? Do it, Noel said after a nudge from the knight. The guards shared a look. I'm just gonna say it. It's your turn, one of them said. Yeah. The other guard grumbled, handing his spear to his comrade. The guard muttered a series of curses under his breath as he climbed onto the back of the wagon. The side of the crate facing them had hinges at the bottom, and was fixed in place only by a thick lock at the top. The guard produced a key. The crate shook, causing the whole wagon to sway. The guard jerked back, looking as though he was having second thoughts. But he shook his head, made a remark about insufficient pay, and unlocked the crate. He was already leaping off the wagon as the crate fell open behind him. At first, all that could be seen inside were shadows. Then, 2 sets of eyes opened. Pate, was it? The knight said suddenly. Yes, the farmer replied. Hold on to him for a moment. The knight gestured to Noel. Yes, sir, Pate said. He grabbed Noel by the shoulder and steered them back from the wagon. The first slimy, scaled claw reached out and grabbed onto the side of the wagon. Its head dipped out of the shadows next, about the same size as that of a full-grown boar. Its lipless, scale-covered face seemed to smile with its mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. Small horns grew around the base of its skull. Pieces of a yellow shell fell off it as it crawled from the crate. Its brother wasn't far behind. The two pushed and shoved, fighting to be the one to taste their first meal. Drakes. The knight hadn't known what type of dragon spawn they would be beforehand. Otherwise, he'd have brought more specific tools. But fortunately, it was a smaller variant of the species. Some drakes laid eggs larger than the wagon itself. That said, when the two drakes slithered onto solid ground, their size hardly seemed insubstantial. They were twice the length of a man from snout to the tip of their tails, and likely weighed several times as much. Alright, kid, they're just hatchlings, so with the both of us, it should be easy enough to... The knight turned to find that Casper had dropped his spear and was currently dashing into the nearby woods. So hard to find a good squire these days. Well then, maybe you gentlemen can... The two guards had also seen fit to vacate the premises. None of the townsfolk seemed keen on jumping in either. The drakes started moving towards him, slowly at first, but gaining speed as they figured out the proper use of their legs. The knight shook his head and sighed. It's as they say, if you want something done right. He drove his sword into the dirt, then kicked Casper's spear up into his hand. Send a knight. With that, he hurled the spear at one of the charging drakes. The spear buried itself in the creature's eye. It let out a guttural howl and clawed at the wound. The other one pounced for the knight. He dove to the side, pulling his sword free as he did. A mouthful of sharp teeth snapped shut around the space he'd just been. One needed to be especially careful near a drake's mouth. Many of them were venomous, which seemed unnecessary, considering how hard they could bite. The knight replied to the drake's lunge by slashing its neck. Too shallow. Wouldn't wound the creature mortally, only make it angrier. The knight backed away, and the drake followed, snarling and snapping at its would-be prey. Perhaps he should have held on to the spear, but the knight hadn't been able to hold the spear quite the same since he'd lost his arm. As he ducked and dodged around the drake's attacks, the knight scored cuts around its face, neck, and front legs. He got a respectable, if ineffective, slash into its side as he dove past a raking claw. Had the creature been older, even that much would have been impossible. An adult drake's scales would turn away almost all sword blows. Finding its bites ineffective, the drake switched tactics. It spun its body, swinging its tail and the knife-sharp scale blade at the end of it. The knight barely managed to leap over the deadly swipe in time. The beast snarled and whipped the tail at him again. While he did manage to leap back in time, on landing, the knight's feet went out from under him, and he fell to one knee. The drake launched itself at him, mouthful of razor-sharp teeth opening wide to make its first kill. The knight surged back up with stunning speed and shoved his sword into the drake's gaping maw. The blade burst out the back of the creature's head, dripping green blood. The knight surged back up with stunning speed and shoved his sword into the drake's gaping maw. The blade burst out the back of the creature's head, dripping green blood. The drake blinked, mouth opening and closing slowly. The knight tore the blade free, and the drake collapsed, as if the sword had been the only thing holding it up. Man or beast, it's hard to pass up an opportunity like a wounded foe, the knight remarked. He didn't have much time to gloat. The second drake, having successfully ripped the spear from its head, along with the eye, was now charging at him. The knight easily sidestepped its bite, keeping on the side that was blinded. He hacked at one of its legs. The creature whirled, snapping at him again, but he kept moving into its blind spot. He continued to slash at its legs. The creature twisted, trying to nail him with its tail, but rather than try to dodge, he stepped into the swing, slicing off the bladed end of its tail. He then moved to the creature's other side and started hacking away at the limbs on that side. All the while, the snarling, furious creature tried to get him within biting range. He never gave it any opportunity. Before long, the creature was writhing on the ground, limbs too damaged to work. The drake looked like he was having second thoughts, but that was a little late now. The knight put the creature out of its misery by finally chopping its head off. It took a few swings. He only had one arm after all. It was dirty work, but the knight had never once allowed himself to feel any measure of sympathy for a dragon spawn. They weren't animals, not in the way a wolf or a bear was. They were children of the dragon, and from birth to death they had but two concerns: the sating of their hunger and the destruction of all mankind. They often combined the two interests. The knight cleaned his blade with a rag at his belt. It was a tricky task with one hand, the sort of work a squire was usually meant to do. At long last, when the blade was suitably clean, the knight sheathed the sword. "Well, I suppose that takes care of that." He nodded, turning back towards the onlookers. They were staring at him, but that was to be expected. It wasn't every day you got to see the slaying of a dragon spawn, let alone two. "Tie that man up, along with his associates inside. The guards too, if they're foolish enough to come back. In the morning, send a message to the local lord explaining what happened here. He should see to trying and punishing these men." "What about you?" Pate eventually asked. "I've got to go track down that squire of mine, then fire him." And with that, the knight set off into the dark, leaving a small crowd of stunned onlookers, singing a song he'd produced on the spot. "Once a strong and bright young lad, now he's a man with less than he had. Chasing a squire, now he's quite mad. Left to dirty work in distant towns and farms. Noble and great Sir Alphonse, the knight with one arm."